The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. If you like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Chapter 14. Princess Anna was not much surprised at the arrival of Jurand of Spykow. It used to happen that during the continual attacks and fights with neighboring German knights, a sudden longing for Danusia seized him. Then he would appear unexpectedly in Warsaw, in Ciechanów, or wherever Prince Janusha's court was situated for the time being. Every time he saw the child, his grief burst forth anew because Danusia looked like her mother. The people thought that his iron heart, filled with feelings of vengeance, would become softer through such grief. The princess often tried to persuade him to abandon his bloody Spykow and remain at the court near Danusia. The prince himself, appreciating his bravery and importance, and at the same time wishing to spare him the fatigue inevitable in the quarrels on the frontier, offered him the office of sword-bearer. It was always in vain. The sight of Danusia opened the old wounds in his heart. After a few days he always lost his appetite, could not sleep, and became silent. Evidently his heart began to bleed, and finally he would disappear from the court and return to the marshes of Spykow in order to drown in blood his grief and anger. Then the people used to say, "Woe to the Germans! It is true they are not sheep, but they are sheep to Jurand, because he is a wolf to them." In fact, after a time, the news would spread about the volunteers who, going to join the Knights of the Cross, were captured on their journey, about burned towns and captured peasants, or about deadly fights from which the terrible Jurand always emerged victorious. On account of the rapacious disposition of the Mazurs, and of the German knights who were holding the land and the strongholds from the Order, even during the greatest peace between the Prince of Mazowsza and the Order, continual fighting was going on near the frontier. Even when cutting wood in the forests or harvesting in the fields, the inhabitants used to carry their arms. The people living there felt no certainty for the morrow, were in continual readiness for war, and were hard-hearted. Nobody was satisfied with defense only, but for pillage repaid with pillage, for conflagration with conflagration, for invasion with invasion. It often happened that while the Germans were stealing through the forest to attack some stronghold and to seize the peasants or the cattle, at the same time the Mazurs were doing the same. Sometimes they met, then they fought, but often only the leaders challenged each other for a deadly fight, after which the conqueror took the retinue of his defeated adversary. Therefore, when complaints were received at the Warsavian court about Jurand, the prince used to reply with complaints about the attacks made by the Germans, asked for justice, but neither was willing to grant it. All robberies, conflagrations, and invasions went unpunished. But Jurand, dwelling in Spykow, surrounded by marshes overgrown with rushes, and being filled with an unquenchable desire for vengeance, was so dreaded by his German neighbors that finally their fear became greater than their courage. The lands bordering upon Spykow were lying fallow, the forests were overgrown with wild hops, and the meadows with reeds. Several German knights tried to settle in the neighborhood of Spykow, but every one of them, after a time, preferred to abandon his estate held in fief, his herds and his peasants, rather than live near this implacable man. Very often the knights planned a common expedition against Spykow, but everyone ended in defeat. They tried different means. One time they brought from the province of Maine a knight noted for his strength and cruelty, and who had always been victorious in all fights. He challenged Jurand, but as soon as they entered the lists, the German was so frightened at the sight of the dreadful Mazur that he wheeled his horse intending to flee. Jurand pierced his defenseless back with a spear, and in that way dishonored him forever. After that, still greater fear filled the neighbors, and if a German perceived even from afar Spykowian smoke, he immediately crossed himself and began to pray to his patron in heaven. It was generally believed that Jurand had sold his soul to the evil one for the sake of vengeance. The people told dreadful tales about Spykow. They said that the path leading to it, through the quaggy marshes which were overgrown with duckweed and had bottomless depths, was so narrow that two men on horseback could not ride abreast, that on each side there were many Germans' bones, and that during the night the heads of drowned men were seen walking on spiders' legs. howling and drawing travelers on horses into the depths. They also said that the gate in the Grodek was ornamented with skeletons. These stories were not true, but in the barred pits dug under the house in Spykow, there were always many groaning prisoners, and Durand's name was more dreadful than those tales about the skeletons and drowned people. Zbyszko, having learned of Durand's arrival, hastened to him, but with a certain uneasiness in his heart because he was Danusia's father. Nobody could forbid him choose Danusia for the lady of his thoughts, but afterward the princess had betrothed them. What will Durand say to that? Will he consent? What will happen if he refuse his consent? These questions filled his heart with fear, because he now cared for Danusia more than for anything else in the world. He was only encouraged by the thought that perhaps Durand would praise him for having attacked Liechtenstein, because he had done it to avenge Danusia's mother, and in consequence had nearly lost his own head. In the meantime he began to question the courtier who had come to Amyles for him. "Where are you conducting me?" asked he. "To the castle." "Yes, to the castle. Durand is with the princess court." "Tell me what kind of a man he is, so that I may know how to talk with him." "What can I tell you? He is a man entirely different from other men. They say that he was mirthful before his blood became seared in his heart." "Is he clever?" "He is cunning. He robs others, but he does not let others rob him. Hey! He has only one eye, because the other was destroyed by the thrust of a German crossbow, but with that one he can look a man through and through. He loves no one except the princess, our lady, and he loves her because his wife was a lady from her court, and now his daughter is with her." Zbyszko breathed. "Then you think that he will not oppose the princess's will?" "I know what you would like to learn, and therefore I will tell you what I heard. The princess spoke to him about your betrothment, because it would not be proper to conceal it from him, but it is not known what he said in reply." While thus speaking, they arrived at the gate. The captain of the archers, the same who had conducted Zbyszko to the scaffold, now saluted them. After having passed the guards, they entered the courtyard and turned to the left toward the part of the castle occupied by the princess. The courtier, meeting a servant in the doorway, asked, "Where is Durand of Spykow?" "In the Krzywi room with his daughter." "It is there," said the courtier, pointing at the door. Zbyszko crossed himself, raised the curtain in the doorway, and entered with throbbing heart. But he did not perceive Durand and Danusia at once, because the room was not only crooked, but dark also. But after a while he saw the fair head of the girl, who was sitting on her father's lap. They did not hear him when he entered, therefore he stopped near the door, and finally he said, "May he be blessed." "For ages and ages," answered Durand, rising. At that moment Danusia sprang toward the young knight, and having seized him with both hands, began to scream, "Zbyszko! Tadas is here!" Zbyszko kissed her hands, then he approached Durand and said, "I came to bow to you, you know who I am." And he bent slightly, making a movement with his hands as if he wished to seize Durand by his knees. But Durand grasped his hand, turned him toward the light, and began to look at him. Zbyszko had already regained his self-possession, therefore he looked with curiosity at Durand. He beheld before him a gigantic man with fallow hair and moustache, with a face pitted with smallpox, and one eye of iron-like color. It seemed to him as if this eye would pierce him, and he again became confused. Finally, not knowing what to say, but wishing to say something to break the embarrassing silence, he asked, "Then you are Durand of Spykow, Danusia's father?" But the other only pointed to an oaken bench, standing beside the chair on which he sat himself, and continued to look at Zbyszko, who finally became impatient, and said, "It is not pleasant for me to sit as though I were in a court." Then Durand said, "You wanted to fight with Liechtenstein?" "Yes," answered Zbyszko. In the eye of the Lord of Spykow shone a strange light, and his stern face began to brighten. After a while he looked at Danusia and asked, "And was it for her?" "For no other. My uncle told you that I made a vow to her to tear the peacock tufts from German heads. But now there shall be not only 3 of them, but at least as many as I have fingers on both hands. In that way I will help you to avenge the death of Danusia's mother." "Woe to them," answered Durand. Then there was silence again. But Zbyszko, having noticed that by showing his hatred of the Germans he would capture Durand's heart, said, I will not forgive them. They nearly caused my death. Here he turned to Danusia and added, She saved me. I know, said Durand. Are you angry? Since you made a vow to her, you must serve her, because such is the knightly custom. Zbyszko hesitated, but after a while he began to say with evident uneasiness, Do you know that she covered my head with her veil? All the knights, and also the Franciscan who was with me holding the cross, heard her say, He is mine. Therefore I will be loyal to her until death, so help me God. Having said this, he kneeled, and wishing to show that he was familiar with the customs of chivalry, he kissed both of Danusia's shoes with great reverence. Then he arose, and having turned to Durand, asked him, Have you ever seen another as fair as she? Durand suddenly put his hands behind his head, and having closed his eyes, he said loudly, I have seen one other, but the Germans killed her. Then listen, said Zbyszko enthusiastically. We have the same wrong and the same vengeance. Those dog brothers also killed my people from Bogdaniec. You cannot find a better man for your work. It is no new thing for me. Ask my uncle. I can fight either with spear or axe, short sword or long sword. Did my uncle tell you about those Frisians? I will slaughter the Germans for you like sheep. And as for the girl, I vow to you on my knees that I will fight for her even with the Starosta of hell himself, and that I will give her up neither for lands nor for herds, nor for any other thing. Even if someone offered me a castle with glass windows in it, but without her, I would refuse the castle and follow her to the end of the world. Durand sat for a while with his head between his hands, but finally he awakened as from a dream, and said with sadness and grief, I like you, young man, but I cannot give her to you. She is not destined for you, my poor boy. Zbyszko, hearing this, grew dumb and began to look at Durand with wondering eyes. But Danusia came to his help. Zbyszko was dear to her, and she was pleased to be considered not a bush, but a grown-up girl. She also liked the betrothal and the dainties which the knight used to bring her every day. Therefore, when she understood that she was likely to lose all this, she slipped down from the armchair, and having put her head on her father's lap, she began to cry. Tatulu, Tatulu. He evidently loved her better than anything else, for he put his hands softly on her head, while from his face disappeared all trace of deadly grudge and anger. Only sadness remained. In the meantime, Zbyszko recovered his composure, and now said, How is it? Do you wish to oppose God's will? To this Durand replied, If it be God's will, then you will get her, but I cannot give you my consent. Bah! I would be glad to do it, but I cannot. Having said this, he arose, took Danusia in his arms, and went toward the door. When Zbyszko tried to detain him, he stopped for a moment and said, I will not be angry with you if you render her knightly services, but do not ask me any questions, because I cannot tell you anything. And he went out.
Remember to subscribe.